Subscribe to True Tears Stories for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. The insult came somewhere between the second glass of wine and the moment Evan offered to help carry dessert trays from the kitchen. "Stay in your lane, Evan," his older brother Tyler said with a half smile that barely masked the condescension underneath. "We don't all need to pretend we're CEOs. There were chuckles, not malicious, just complicit. Cousins, aunts, even their father gave that knowing glance Evan had learned to decode years ago. It's just Tyler being Tyler. Evan held the tray a little tighter. He smiled, politely, the way he always had. But something shifted in his chest, like a button finally popping off a shirt that never fit. He spent the rest of the evening pretending not to replay it. He watched his brother bask in attention, booming laughter, retelling office war stories from a job he'd been forced to leave a few months prior. The details had always been vague. Corporate restructuring, Tyler had called it. Internal politics. Evan hadn't asked questions. He'd learned long ago that curiosity about Tyler's life only ever earned him that same smirk, the same pat on the shoulder that said, "You wouldn't get it." So he just watched. He always watched. He helped clear the dishes, thanked their mother, said goodbye to relatives who remembered his name only because he shared the same last one as Tyler. On the drive home, Evan kept both hands on the steering wheel. It was raining softly, the kind of rain that gave you space to think. The truth was, Evan had been building something. Slowly, quietly. He'd launched a data consulting firm 2 years ago. Nothing flashy, nothing that required press releases or family praise, but it was growing. Profitable. His small team respected him, even if no one at home knew what he actually did. He never brought it up, because somehow, no matter what he said, he remained Tyler's little brother. That night, Evan sat at his kitchen table, the leftover sting of Tyler's words echoing in the quiet. "Stay in your lane." Evan opened his laptop. His inbox pinged with a notification, a LinkedIn update. A former colleague of Tyler's had just left his job at Ascendatech. Evan clicked through. And there, buried 3 posts down, was the one detail Tyler had never mentioned. Ascenda Tech cuts 20% of workforce amid insider scandal. His heart slowed. His fingers hovered. It wasn't just restructuring. It was something bigger. Something Tyler hadn't told anyone, or maybe had trusted no one to question. Evan stared at the headline for a long time. The familiar narrative began to write itself in his head. Tyler falls. Tyler spins. The family protects. Stay in your lane. Evan clicked save, then opened another tab. He typed in the company's name again. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like someone trailing behind. He felt like someone about to pass. Evan didn't tell anyone, not his mother, who still referred to Tyler's exit as that unfortunate reshuffle, and certainly not his father, who hadn't asked Evan a serious question about his career in over a decade. Instead, he listened. At family dinner the following week, Tyler arrived late as usual, wearing an open-collar shirt and the kind of confidence that had always excused him from accountability. He launched into stories from advisory meetings and potential partners, vague enough to impress but hollow beneath the shine. Their mother beamed. "He always lands on his feet," she said to Evan, not noticing his quiet nod. But something had shifted. Evan wasn't shrinking anymore. He was studying. Tyler's phrasing changed. Transition period. Non-compete. Taking time to realign. All the language of someone spinning uncertainty into dignity. Evan started making calls. At first, it was curiosity. He reached out to a former classmate who had worked in Ascenditech's legal division. She didn't say much, but her silence was telling. He dug deeper. Public records, SEC filings, a dismissed ethics complaint that never reached the headlines. A whistleblower settlement? Tyler's name wasn't the story, but it was in the fine print. One of the executives named in an internal memo. Terminated without cause, but not absolved. Evan printed it, folded it once, put it in his desk drawer. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it wasn't about revenge. Not yet. Maybe it was just about knowing, for once, what his brother never expected him to find. At work, Evan stayed quiet. He took more meetings, landed a new client. On paper, things looked the same, but he moved differently. At lunch, with his project lead, he asked, "Have you heard of Ascenditech?" "Yeah," she said, chewing thoughtfully. "Tanked last year. Something shady at the top, I think. Why?" "No reason?" He paused, then added, "Do you know if it's for sale?" She raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking of buying a crater?" Evan shrugged. Sometimes the best way to build is to start from the wreckage. The research began that night. He combed through holding firms, asset sales, leasing contracts. Ascenditech's name had changed, folded into a shell company for restructuring. But its infrastructure still existed. And it was cheap, too cheap. Evan met with a broker, used a quiet alias, no big headlines, no paper trail connecting him to Tyler in any way. By the end of the month, he had a controlling interest. No one congratulated him. He didn't tell anyone. The first person to know was a facilities manager named Ruth. She'd worked at Ascenditech for 15 years and stayed through the collapse. She greeted Evan in the lobby of the half-vacant office tower and asked, "You new ownership?" "Yes," he said. She tilted her head. "You look young." "I am." Ruth smiled slowly. "Then maybe you'll actually listen to what went wrong." He did. That was the thing about Evan. He always listened. He walked the halls Tyler used to rule, looked into offices that once buzzed with meetings he'd never been invited to. And in every corner of the building, he saw not just his brother's fall, but his own rise waiting to take shape. At home, the emails from Tyler kept coming. "Let's catch up soon, man. Dad said you're working on something big. Proud of you. Heard a rumor you're sniffing around Ascenda." "That true?" Evan didn't reply. Instead, he framed one line from the internal memo and placed it behind his desk. No position is so high that it exempts you from the truth. And for the first time in his life, Evan didn't feel like the invisible son. He felt like the one who saw everything. The first time Evan stood in what used to be Tyler's corner office, he didn't sit. He just stared out the window, arms crossed, as if the view itself had inherited a memory. A phantom echo of swagger, of arrogance disguised as leadership, still lingered in the walls. He didn't want to erase it. He wanted to rewrite it. The buyout closed quietly. Legally, Ascenditech no longer existed. It was now folded into LumenPath Analytics, Evan's own company. But the bones remained. The building, the client base, the ones who hadn't fled during the scandal were ready for something new. Evan gave them exactly that. He didn't hang plaques, no new CEO announcement. Instead, he worked from the middle of the floor plan, choosing a modest glass office with no nameplate. His staff knew who he was, but he never led with it. He let competence speak. Weeks passed. They rebuilt process flows, cleaned up old contracts, streamlined services. By month 3, a mid-tier competitor made a failed acquisition attempt. Evan declined with a single sentence: "We're not for sale. We're just getting started." And still, no one in his family knew. Until the quarterly dinner at his parents' house. Tyler was already there when Evan arrived, dominating the living room like always. Feet propped on the ottoman, wine glass in hand, charm turned up just enough to distract from the fatigue behind his eyes. He looked older, thinner maybe, but still polished, still talking in big, vague terms. "You know," Tyler said, across the dinner table, pointing a fork like a microphone, "I almost bought LumenPath last year. Thought about merging it under a new consulting brand I had going. But, well, you know how it goes." Evan smiled. "I didn't know you were interested in analytics." Tyler laughed. "I'm interested in ownership. Doesn't matter the product, just matters who holds the cards." There it was. The family laughed lightly, not understanding the game playing out beneath the surface. Later, as Evan helped his mother with the dishes, Tyler leaned against the doorway. "You're doing well," he said. "I've been hearing your name lately." "From who?" Tyler shrugged. "Around. The city's not that big." Evan dried a plate, slow and steady. "Funny, I've heard your name too." Something passed between them. Not open hostility, just a silent acknowledgement that the dynamic had changed. Tyler didn't press. He never did when he felt the ground shifting. 2 days later, Evan received a message from Ruth. "Someone from your brother's LLC called the front desk asking about vacancies. Want me to block them?" Evan replied, "No, let them walk in," and they did. Tyler showed up a week later, pretending not to recognize the new logo on the office door. He asked to speak to whoever was running the place now. Ruth led him to the glass office. Evan stood when he entered. Tyler blinked, uncertain for the first time in years. "You?" "I thought I'd stay in my lane," Evan said calmly. "So I bought the whole highway." Tyler laughed, short and nervous. "That's cute. Is this some kind of joke?" Evan sat. "Do I look like I'm joking?" The silence stretched. Tyler looked around. The familiar desks, the same reception counter. And yet, everything had changed. "You don't know what this place is," he said quietly. "I know exactly what it is," Evan said. "I've been studying it for years." He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Tyler stood frozen, as if unsure whether to fight or flee. "So what now? You gonna throw it in my face? Fire everyone I hired?" "I'm going to rebuild it right," Evan said. "That's all." Tyler nodded once. "You really did it." Evan looked at him then, not as a brother, not even as a rival, but as a man who had finally lost the privilege of underestimation. "I did." Tyler didn't show up to the next family dinner. No explanation, no call. Their mother set a plate for him anyway, draped it with foil, and placed it in the fridge, just in case. Evan didn't ask about it. No one did. The silence felt too neat, too practiced. Like everyone knew something had shifted, but were waiting for permission to acknowledge it. He stayed behind afterward, helping wash the dishes again. His mother still spoke about Tyler in the present tense. "You know he's just going through a hard time," she said softly. "He'll bounce back. He always does." Evan didn't correct her. He simply rinsed another plate. Back at Lumen Path, the work kept moving. Contracts closed. Clients referred others. They expanded into 2 new sectors. Evan remained steady, consistent, but part of him kept bracing for a knock, literal or metaphorical. It came in the form of an email. Subject: Coffee? From Tyler. Message: Just 15 minutes. I'm not here to fight. Evan didn't respond right away. He let it sit. That evening, he found himself standing in front of a coffee shop window 10 minutes early, watching his own reflection. Not the overlooked little brother, not the punchline, just a man with nothing to prove anymore. Tyler arrived looking like someone who hadn't slept much. The usual polish was gone, shirt untucked, hair slightly unkempt, a haunted look behind his eyes. He sat across from Evan and sighed. "I'm not gonna lie, that one hurt." Evan stirred his drink. "Which part?" Tyler smirked, tired. "You taking what I built, turning it into something better." "You didn't build it," Evan said. "You just stood on it until it collapsed." They sat in silence for a long moment. "I was wrong about you," Tyler said finally. "You were always sharper than you let on." "No," Evan said. "I was always sharp. You just never looked long enough to see it." Tyler nodded. "So, what happens now?" "You move on," Evan said, "and I keep going." "That simple?" "Yes," Evan said, calm but unshakable. "Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about finally standing up." Tyler let out a breath that sounded half like a laugh. "You always had that accountant look. I should have known." Evan smiled faintly. "You should have." They didn't hug. They didn't make promises. But when Tyler stood and left, Evan didn't feel the usual trace of resentment following him. Just quiet. Weeks later, at a holiday dinner, Tyler showed up late again. But this time, Evan was already seated at the center of the table, their father asking him questions about the business, cousins listening closely. No one made a toast. But for the first time, Evan didn't feel like a guest in his own family. He felt like he'd arrived. Evan stayed behind after dinner, sipping tea while the others drifted into the living room. The hum of muted conversation floated around him, but he let it fade into the background. He was content to just sit, finally full in more ways than one. There had been no grand confrontation, no slammed doors or fiery accusations, just slow, inevitable clarity, like fog lifting from a coastline he hadn't realized he'd been sailing all his life. Tyler was quieter now, not diminished exactly, but real. There were no more boasts, no casual jabs meant to put Evan back in place. The hierarchy had shifted, not by force, but by something gentler. Truth. Their father had asked Evan for advice tonight, for the first time in memory. Not about money, or Tyler, or the business. Just a question about how to start something new. Evan had answered without hesitation. He thought about that framed quote in his office. "No position is so high that it exempts you from the truth." For so long, he'd believed the inverse, that no role was low enough to earn respect. But it wasn't about position. It was about presence. And he'd found his. In the hallway mirror, he caught his reflection as he grabbed his coat. It didn't startle him anymore. He looked like someone he recognized. Outside, the night was cold, still. Evan walked to his car without rushing, without checking his phone. There were no messages waiting, no congratulations, no applause. But for the first time, he didn't need any. He had everything he came for: peace, a name that meant something, and the quiet power of having chosen himself.